The first time I realized my HOA was trying to scare me was when I was standing in my kitchen holding a letter that demanded $250,000 because I'd been feeding 3 stray dogs. I remember staring at that number over and over again, convinced there had to be a typo. I even cleaned my glasses and read it again. There wasn't any typo. They wanted $250,000. And if I didn't pay within 30 days, they claimed they had the authority to place a lien against my home. Now, if you're wondering how feeding a few hungry dogs could possibly lead to that, you're asking the exact same question I asked. But before I tell you how that letter ended up becoming the single biggest mistake that HOA board ever made, you need to understand who I am. My name is David Carter. I'm 68 years old. I'm a retired high school history teacher. I live alone in the same little ranch house my wife and I bought 31 years ago. My wife, Ellen, passed away from pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. She loved animals more than she loved people. Actually, let me correct that. She believed you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by the way they treated an animal that couldn't do anything for them. After she died, the house became painfully quiet. Too quiet. The television stayed off most evenings. The extra chair at the dinner table stayed empty. And for the first year, I honestly don't remember much besides going through the motions. Then one rainy October morning, I opened my front door and found the skinniest German Shepherd I'd ever seen sitting on my porch. She was just waiting. Like she'd somehow decided this was the safest place left in the world. I found half a rotisserie chicken in the refrigerator. I tore it into little pieces. She wouldn't come close enough for me to touch her, but she ate every bite. The next morning she came back. The morning after that, she brought 2 friends. One was an old black Labrador whose muzzle had already turned gray. The other was a tiny brown mutt with one floppy ear that stood straight up whenever she got excited. I never named them because they weren't my dogs. They were just 3 souls trying to survive. So every morning, I filled 3 bowls. Every evening, I filled them again. That was it. No social media videos, no fundraising. Just dog food, fresh water, and someone treating them like they mattered. For nearly 2 years, nobody complained. In fact, most of my neighbors smiled when they saw them. Kids would leave treats. An elderly couple down the street even bought insulated dog houses one winter. The whole neighborhood quietly looked after them. Then everything changed. Her name was Victoria Langford. She moved into the largest house in the subdivision. Brand new black Mercedes. Perfect landscaping. Perfect everything. At least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. Within 6 months she'd somehow convinced enough people to elect her HOA president. At first I didn't think much about it. I've lived through 7 HOA presidents. Most of them cared about paint colors and mailbox styles. Victoria was different. She cared about power. The first thing she did was hire a private landscaping company to replace perfectly healthy flowers around the entrance sign. Then she doubled the HOA dues. Then she started issuing violation notices for things nobody had ever complained about before. Garden hoses, holiday decorations, basketball hoops. One family got fined because their son's bicycle had been leaning against the garage for 2 days. People grumbled and nobody challenged her. Looking back, that was our biggest mistake. Bullies don't become bullies overnight. They become bullies because people keep stepping aside. I still kept feeding the dogs every morning. I noticed Victoria watching me from inside her SUV more than once. She never rolled her window down. Never waved. Just stared like she was studying me. One Saturday morning I was filling the water bowls when she finally walked over. She wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members followed a few steps behind her carrying clipboards. Victoria stopped just inside my driveway. She looked down at the dogs with obvious disgust. Then she looked at me. "You need to stop feeding them." That was the first sentence she ever spoke to me. No hello, no introduction. Just an order. I smiled politely. "I'm on my own property." She folded her arms. "You're attracting strays. They were already here. They're becoming comfortable. They're becoming healthy." Her smile disappeared. "That's exactly the problem." The little brown mutt wagged her tail and walked toward Victoria. Victoria actually stepped backward. "You see," she said. "They're approaching residence now." I looked down. The dog simply wanted attention. I bent over and scratched behind her ears. "She's never bitten anybody." Victoria ignored me. "The HOA has received complaints." "From who?" "I don't discuss confidential reports." "How many?" "Enough." I waited. Finally I asked the question that changed everything. "Can you show me the rule I'm breaking?" For just a second, she froze. It wasn't even a full second, but I saw it. She hadn't expected me to ask. One of the board members quietly flipped through the HOA handbook. Victoria stopped him before he found anything. "We don't need to debate this." I smiled again. I wasn't asking for a debate. I was asking for the rule. She stared at me for another few seconds before turning around. "This isn't over, Mr. Carter." As they walked away, the younger board member looked back at me. He almost looked embarrassed. At the time, I thought I'd won. I thought she'd realized she didn't actually have a rule to enforce. I couldn't have been more wrong. 3 days later, the first violation notice appeared in my mailbox. It wasn't for feeding stray dogs. It was for creating an unsanitary condition likely to attract wildlife. The fine. About $100. I laughed. "I clean the feeding area twice a day." There wasn't a single piece of leftover food anywhere, so I took photographs, printed them, attached them to an appeal. I thought common sense would solve everything. It didn't. The HOA rejected my appeal without explanation. 2 weeks later, another violation arrived. This time they claimed my water bowls were an unauthorized exterior structure. Another fine, then another and another. It felt like someone had declared war over 3 stainless steel dog bowls. What I didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that Victoria wasn't trying to collect money. She was building a case. And somewhere inside the clubhouse, a security camera was quietly recording everything that would eventually bring her entire board crashing down. The next month was unlike anything I'd experienced in 68 years. It started small. Every Tuesday morning, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. Every Friday afternoon, another violation was added to my account. It didn't matter what I did. If I moved the feeding bowls closer to my porch, they said I was attracting animals to neighboring lots. If I moved them farther back into my yard, they claimed I was operating an unauthorized animal shelter. One week they cited me because the bowls were visible from the street. The following week they cited me because I'd installed a small wooden fence around the feeding area. Apparently the fence violated community aesthetics. I removed it. The next notice claimed I'd failed to provide an approved feeding station. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening with violation letters spread out in front of me. Nothing made sense anymore. It felt like they were inventing rules faster than I could comply with them. I called the HOA management office. The receptionist sounded exhausted before I even finished introducing myself. "Mr. Carter," she sighed, "you're going to have to discuss this with President Langford." "I've tried. I'm sorry." She genuinely sounded sorry. That was the first clue that something wasn't right. A week later I attended the monthly HOA meeting. Normally only a dozen people showed up. That night nearly 40 residents filled the clubhouse. Word had spread. Victoria stood behind the podium wearing a navy business suit like she was running for governor instead of presiding over a homeowners association. When the meeting reached the public comment section, I stood up. "I'd like to know exactly which bylaw says I can't feed animals on my own property." Victoria smiled without looking at me. "The board has already addressed that concern." "No," I replied calmly. "You've avoided it." A few neighbors nodded. Someone in the back quietly clapped once before stopping. Victoria picked up the rulebook. She flipped pages dramatically. Then she quoted a section about maintaining sanitary conditions. I had already memorized it. "Would you mind reading the next sentence?" I asked. She stopped. Silence filled the room. "The next sentence," I repeated. She didn't move. So I pulled out my own copy. "Residents may maintain bird feeders, wildlife gardens, and other lawful activities on privately owned lots provided they do not create hazardous conditions." I looked around the room. There is absolutely nothing in this document prohibiting me from feeding 3 hungry dogs. The room became very quiet. Victoria closed the handbook. "This meeting is not a courtroom." "No," I said. "But maybe it ought to be." For just a moment her smile disappeared. Then she struck the gavel. "Public comment is concluded." People filed out afterward in small groups. An elderly veteran named Frank caught up with me in the parking lot. He looked over both shoulders before speaking. "She's done this before." "What do you mean?" "Not like this. But every time someone questions her, suddenly violations start showing up." "Why hasn't anyone said anything?" Frank gave a tired little laugh. "Because most people get fined $50 and decide it's easier to stay quiet." He paused. "But she's different with you." I asked him why. "I think she's trying to make an example." That sentence stayed with me all week. An example. Of what? Feeding dogs? Being stubborn? Or refusing to back down? Then things became personal. One Saturday morning I walked outside with breakfast for the dogs. Only one bowl remained. The other 2 had disappeared. So had the little wooden shelters neighbors had helped me build. The shepherd was pacing nervously. The black lab kept sniffing the empty spots where the bowls had been. The little brown mutt was nowhere to be found. I searched for nearly an hour before finding her hiding beneath my old pickup truck. She was trembling. I checked my doorbell camera. At 2:17 that morning, 2 figures wearing hooded sweatshirts entered my yard. They loaded the shelters into the back of a white maintenance truck. The video wasn't clear enough to identify faces. But one detail stood out. The truck had the HOA maintenance logo on the driver's door. I copied the footage onto a flash drive. Monday morning I walked straight into the HOA office. Victoria was already there. I placed the flash drive on her desk. "I'd like my property back." She barely glanced at it. "I have no idea what that is." "You will after you watch it." She slid it back across the desk. "We're finished here." I looked directly into her eyes. "No." She frowned. "We're just getting started." That afternoon I filed a police report. The responding officer watched the footage twice. He couldn't identify the people either. But he noticed something I hadn't. The truck's roof carried a fleet identification number. The officer smiled. "That narrows it down." 2 days later he called me back. "The truck belongs to your HOA." My stomach dropped. "So, they stole my property?" "They say it was removed during routine maintenance." "Routine maintenance?" "That's what they're claiming." "I built those shelters." "I know." He hesitated. "Mr. Carter, off the record?" "Go ahead." "I'd start documenting everything." "I already am." "No." He leaned closer. I mean everything. When you leave your house. When they drive by. When you get your mail. Everything. I took his advice. That same afternoon I bought 3 outdoor security cameras. One covered the driveway. One overlooked the backyard. The third pointed directly toward the sidewalk and feeding area. Installing those cameras felt almost silly. I honestly believed they would simply discourage whoever had taken the shelters. I had no idea the most important camera in this entire story wasn't mine. It was already hanging from the ceiling inside the HOA clubhouse. And before long, it was about to capture something Victoria Langford would spend the rest of her life wishing had never happened. I wish I could tell you the cameras changed everything overnight. They didn't. For nearly 3 weeks, nothing happened. Every morning I filled the bowls. Every evening the dogs came back. Life almost felt normal again. Almost. The violation notices kept arriving like clockwork. Every Tuesday. Every Friday. Different wording. Same message. Pay up, or else. Then one afternoon my attorney called. His name was Marcus Reed. A friend from church had recommended him after hearing what was happening. He specialized in property disputes, and unlike everyone else I'd spoken to, he didn't laugh when I showed him the stack of fines. He spread every notice across his conference table. Didn't say a word for almost 10 minutes. Then he leaned back in his chair. Mr. Carter, I've got good news and bad news. I could use some good news. The good news is, I don't think any of these fines would survive a judge. I finally smiled. The bad news? They know that. I frowned. What do you mean? Marcus tapped the notices one by one. These aren't designed to win. They're designed to overwhelm you. They're hoping you'll either pay or move. That sentence hit me harder than any fine ever had. This was the home Ellen and I had built together. Every tree in the backyard had a memory attached to it. Every room still carried traces of her. They weren't just trying to collect money. They wanted my house. Marcus continued reading. Then he stopped on one particular page. Interesting. What? This penalty supposedly passed during a board vote. So according to these minutes, the meeting ended before this vote supposedly happened. I stared at him. How's that possible? It isn't. He looked up. Unless someone changed the paperwork afterward. That was the first time either of us considered something much bigger might be happening. Marcus immediately requested every board meeting record from the previous 12 months. Emails, voting logs, attendance sheets, security records, everything. The HOA responded 2 weeks later. 3 thick binders arrived. Marcus invited me back to his office. For nearly 6 hours we went through every page. Something felt off. Dates didn't line up. Signatures looked different from meeting to meeting. Entire pages appeared to use different printers. Then Marcus noticed something neither of us expected. The security logs are missing. What security logs? The clubhouse. They have electronic key cards. Every time someone enters after hours, the system records it. But those records aren't here. I shrugged. Maybe they forgot. Marcus laughed. Organizations never forget evidence that helps them. They only forget evidence that hurts them. The next morning he filed another legal request. This one specifically demanded electronic access records and surveillance footage from every meeting where my fines had increased. Victoria fought it immediately. Her attorney claimed the recordings had already been deleted. Marcus wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge. A hearing was scheduled. The judge ordered the HOA to preserve every digital record immediately. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, I noticed Victoria standing across the parking lot talking with another board member. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked worried. For the first time since this nightmare started, she looked nervous. That weekend something strange happened. The shepherd didn't come for breakfast. Neither did the lab. Only the little brown mutt showed up. She kept looking toward the woods behind my house, whining, running a few steps, coming back. I followed her. About 200 yards into the tree line, I found both dogs. They were trapped inside an old chain link enclosure. Someone had wrapped heavy cable around the gate. There was no food, no water. The shepherd barked the second she saw me. The lab barely lifted his head. I cut the cable with bolt cutters I'd brought home years earlier. They stumbled out. The lab could hardly stand. I drove straight to the veterinarian. Severe dehydration. Mild starvation. No permanent damage. But according to the vet, they'd probably been trapped for at least 2 days. I sat in my truck afterward, completely numb. Who does something like that? Who looks at harmless animals and decides they deserve to suffer? That evening my driveway camera finally recorded something useful. At 1:13 in the morning, an HOA maintenance pickup slowly rolled past my house. It didn't stop. It didn't park. It simply crawled by at walking speed. 5 minutes later, it came back. This time, someone inside pointed a flashlight toward my yard. Then the truck disappeared again. I copied the footage onto another flash drive. Marcus watched it twice. Then he looked at me. They're watching you. I know. No. He paused. I don't think you do. He enlarged one frame. On the passenger seat sat Victoria Langford. She wasn't driving. She wasn't working. She was simply watching my house. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Marcus quietly closed his laptop. I'm hiring a forensic investigator. I blinked. For what? I think this stopped being an HOA dispute weeks ago. 3 days later, the investigator called. His name was Alan Pierce, former state investigator. Quiet voice, sharp eyes. He met us outside the clubhouse. He spent nearly an hour walking around the building without saying much. Then he looked up. There. Marcus followed his finger. Mounted above the main entrance. A brand new commercial security camera. Alan smiled. That's not the interesting one. He pointed higher. Above a second-floor hallway window, another camera. Almost impossible to notice. It covers the executive conference room entrance. So? I asked. So if board members entered after meetings ended? That camera saw every one of them. Marcus looked at Alan. And if the HOA says the footage was deleted? Alan smiled again. Commercial systems don't actually delete that easily. They archive. Somebody just has to know where. That single sentence changed everything. Marcus immediately subpoenaed the security company that installed the clubhouse cameras. Not the HOA. The company. 5 days later, the company's attorney responded. They still maintained encrypted cloud backups. Every second. Every camera. For 3 years. The HOA couldn't delete them. Even if they wanted to. Marcus looked at me across his desk. For the first time since we'd met. He grinned. Mr. Carter? I think we just found the beginning of the end. I thought the footage would prove someone stole my dog shelters. Maybe identify whoever locked the dogs inside that enclosure. I was aiming low. I had no idea those cameras had captured something far worse. Not vandalism. Not trespassing. Conspiracy. And once we saw what happened inside that clubhouse after midnight, there was no putting the truth back in the dark. The security company delivered the footage on 2 encrypted hard drives. Marcus called me the moment they arrived. His exact words were, "Bring coffee." When I walked into his office, he already had 3 computer monitors running. Alan Pierce was there too. The room was quiet. Not nervous quiet. Focused quiet. The kind of silence you hear right before someone opens a time capsule. Marcus plugged in the first drive. A list of camera names appeared. Front entrance. Parking lot. Reception. Hallway east. Hallway west. Conference room entrance. Records office. Maintenance garage. Hundreds of hours of video. Months of it. We started with the dates listed beside my largest finds. The first several hours were boring. Residents arriving. People leaving. Cleaning crews vacuuming carpets. Nothing unusual. Then, 11:18 p.m. The clubhouse should have been empty. Instead, Victoria walked through the front door using her own key card. She wasn't alone. 3 board members followed her inside carrying folders. Marcus paused the video. The official meeting minutes say the meeting ended at 8:05. Alan checked another screen. The alarm system wasn't armed until 1:14 in the morning. Marcus looked at me. So what were they doing for 5 hours? We kept watching. The hallway camera showed everyone entering the executive conference room. Nobody came out for almost 2 hours. Unfortunately, there wasn't a camera inside. For a moment I thought we'd hit a dead end. Then Alan leaned closer to the monitor. Wait. He rewound the footage. Victoria stepped into the hallway carrying a thick folder. She walked directly toward the records office. The camera followed her. She unlocked the door. Went inside. Stayed there for 14 minutes. When she came out, the folder she'd been carrying was gone. Alan enlarged the frame. She was now holding only a single envelope. Marcus immediately requested the keycard logs. Within an hour, they arrived. The timestamps matched perfectly. Victoria had entered the records office 11 different nights. Every single visit happened after meetings involving my case. Every one. Marcus smiled. Let's see what's inside that records room. The second hard drive contained another surprise. A small camera overlooked the hallway leading into the records archive. Not inside the room. Just outside. Enough to see people entering. Enough to see what they carried. Enough to see what they left with. We skipped to the first visit. Victoria entered carrying 1 folder. She exited carrying nothing. The second visit. 3 folders in. 1 folder out. Third visit. A cardboard archive box disappeared completely. Alan folded his arms. Documents don't erase themselves. Marcus looked at me. They're cleaning the file. My stomach turned. Until that moment, I honestly believed this had been about me. Now I wasn't so sure. If someone was secretly altering records, how many other homeowners had this happen to? Alan had the same thought. He requested the HOA's financial reports. Not because of my fines. Because people who alter one record usually alter others. 3 days later, his phone rang. He put it on speaker. The forensic accountant didn't waste time. I think you've got embezzlement. Marcus looked up immediately. How much? We're still counting. The accountant explained that thousands of dollars had been paid to companies that barely existed. Landscaping invoices, consulting fees, emergency maintenance, all approved during executive sessions. Many of those approvals carried signatures from the exact same board meetings where my penalties had mysteriously increased. Marcus leaned back. So while everyone was looking at Mr. Carter, they were stealing from the HOA. Alan nodded slowly. And Mr. Carter became the distraction. Everything suddenly made sense. The endless fines. The intimidation. The constant pressure. If everyone in the neighborhood spent months talking about the crazy man feeding stray dogs, nobody would pay attention to missing money. I wasn't the target. I was the smokescreen. Marcus immediately expanded the lawsuit. No longer just wrongful fines. Now it included fraud, selective enforcement, retaliation, and evidence tampering. News spread faster than I expected. Residents started calling Marcus's office, one after another. An elderly widow said she'd paid nearly $12,000 in landscaping violations she never understood. A young couple claimed they'd been threatened with foreclosure over fence approvals that had already been granted. Another homeowner said Victoria demanded cash payments to speed up architectural reviews. Alan created a timeline across an entire conference room wall. Photographs, meeting dates, bank records, security footage. Every string connected back to the same handful of people. Victoria, Treasurer Bill Hansen, Secretary Linda Cross, 2 outside contractors, 1 management consultant, 5 people, years of manipulation, and 1 little security camera that never blinked. A month later, the courtroom was completely full. I'd never seen so many reporters in our county courthouse. Residents filled every seat. Some stood along the walls. Victoria walked in wearing another expensive suit. She smiled at reporters. She even waved. Looking back, I don't think she understood how much evidence Marcus already had. The judge called the hearing to order. The HOA attorney spoke first. He insisted the board had simply enforced community rules. He argued that my repeated refusal to comply justified every fine. Marcus stood, walked slowly to the evidence table, then placed a portable hard drive in front of the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to play Exhibit 42. The lights dimmed. The courtroom projector came alive. First, the hallway footage. Victoria entering the conference room nearly 3 hours after the official meeting had supposedly ended. Second, the records office. Victoria walking in with folders, walking out without them. Third, the keycard log. Every timestamp appeared beside the corresponding video. Perfect matches. No gaps. No missing minutes. The room became so quiet, you could hear someone coughing near the back row. Victoria's attorney stood. Objection. The judge didn't even look up. Overruled. Marcus continued. Then he played something none of us expected. Another hallway camera. Different date. Same conference room. This time, the conference room door opened unexpectedly. For just 2 seconds, the interior became visible. Long enough to see Victoria standing beside a whiteboard. Written across the board in thick black marker were the words, Carter case. Below it, columns, violation, fine, escalation, pressure. Marcus froze the frame. No one in the courtroom spoke. He zoomed in. The final column clearly read, foreclosure option. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. She hadn't wanted compliance. She hadn't wanted the money. She wanted my house. The judge slowly removed his glasses, looked toward Victoria, then back at the screen. Counsel, does your client wish to explain this exhibit? Victoria looked toward her attorney. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked afraid. Not angry, not confident. Afraid, because the camera she'd forgotten about had just shown the entire courtroom exactly who she really was. And we still hadn't played the most devastating piece of footage. The courtroom stayed silent. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the reporters stopped typing. Marcus looked at the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff would now like to introduce Exhibit 43. Victoria's attorney stood so fast his chair nearly tipped over. Objection. On what grounds? The judge asked. We haven't authenticated the recording. Marcus smiled. We already have. He handed the clerk a sworn affidavit from the security company's chief systems engineer. The engineer certified the footage came directly from the encrypted cloud archive. No edits. No missing frames. No alterations. The judge glanced through the document for less than 30 seconds. Objection overruled. Marcus nodded toward the courtroom technician. Please play the video. The screen changed. The timestamp read 12:41 a.m. Conference room interior. I blinked. The conference room had a camera? Marcus leaned over and whispered. The HOA didn't know it was active. Apparently, when the clubhouse security system had been upgraded, the installer had placed a small ceiling camera inside the conference room for insurance purposes after a series of burglaries years earlier. Victoria believed only the hallway cameras worked. She was wrong. The footage began. Victoria stood at the head of a long conference table. 5 board members sat around her. Stacks of paperwork covered the table. There was no audio, but the body language told its own story. Victoria slid a packet toward Treasurer Bill Hansen. He looked down, shook his head, pushed it back. Victoria leaned forward. She pointed toward another document, then toward me. Well, toward my photograph. Someone had printed a picture of me feeding the shepherd. Bill crossed his arms. Victoria said something. Nobody could hear it. Whatever she said, Bill looked down, slowly picked up a pen, and signed. Marcus froze the frame. He zoomed in. The heading on the document became readable. Assessment increase authorization. Below that, my address. The amount. $250,000. A woman sitting behind me gasped. Someone whispered, my God. The footage continued. Another board member refused to sign. Victoria stood, walked around the table, placed both hands on the back of his chair. She leaned down, spoke directly into his ear. The man looked visibly uncomfortable. After several seconds, he signed too. Marcus let the video keep playing. The final board member, Emily Foster, the youngest member of the board, didn't sign. She shook her head repeatedly. Victoria pointed toward the exit. Emily stood, collected her purse, walked out. Marcus stopped the recording, then looked toward the witness stand. The plaintiff calls Emily Foster. A young woman stepped forward. She looked nervous. She took the oath. Marcus asked one simple question. Why did you leave the meeting? Emily took a deep breath. Because what they were doing wasn't legal. The room became perfectly still. Marcus nodded. What specifically made you believe that? Emily swallowed. Mrs. Langford said if Mr. Carter couldn't pay, the HOA could eventually force him to sell. She paused. I told her that's not why people join neighborhood boards. Marcus asked another question. Did you vote in favor of the $250,000 assessment? No. Did you ever authorize anyone to vote on your behalf? No. Marcus turned toward the jury box. The official minutes show Ms. Foster voting yes. Emily looked directly at the judge. I never voted yes. Victoria's attorney stood again. Objection. Overruled. Marcus displayed the official meeting minutes on the projector. Every board member supposedly voted in favor. Emily pointed toward her signature. That's not mine. The judge leaned forward. You are testifying under oath that your signature was forged? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus quietly handed another document to the clerk. A forensic handwriting report. The expert concluded Emily's signature on multiple HOA documents had likely been copied from previous records. Victoria finally spoke. She's lying. It was the first time anyone had heard her voice all morning. Emily turned toward her. No. You lied. You lied to every homeowner in this neighborhood. Victoria shot up from her chair. You're doing this because you were removed from the board. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I resigned. I couldn't watch you ruin innocent people's lives anymore. Several homeowners in the gallery nodded. One older man quietly wiped his eyes. Marcus wasn't finished. He walked back to the evidence table, picked up another folder. This next exhibit explains motive. He projected several financial statements. Payments from the HOA. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. The recipient? Langford Community Consulting. Marcus looked toward Victoria. Would you tell the court who owns this company? Victoria didn't answer. Marcus displayed corporate registration records. President. Victoria Langford. Registered address. Her home. The room erupted. The judge struck his gavel 3 times. Order. Marcus continued calmly. During the same period Mr. Carter accumulated $250,000 in fines. Your consulting company received more than $400,000 from the HOA. Victoria's attorney buried his face in his hands. Marcus wasn't accusing anymore. He was proving. Alan Pierce stepped onto the witness stand next. He explained the forensic audit. How timestamps had been altered. Meeting minutes rewritten. Financial records backdated. Every conclusion supported by digital evidence recovered directly from archived servers. No opinions. Only facts. The judge listened carefully, then asked Alan one question. In your professional opinion, was this an isolated incident? Alan answered immediately. No, Your Honor. This appears to be an organized pattern that lasted several years. Those words changed the entire case. It wasn't about my dogs anymore. It wasn't even about my fines. It had become a criminal investigation. The county prosecutor quietly entered the courtroom during a short recess. When everyone returned, he wasn't sitting with the audience. He was seated beside the state's investigators. Victoria noticed. Her confidence vanished. Marcus looked at me, almost smiling. We're close. I whispered back. To winning? He shook his head. No. To the truth. About 15 minutes later, the judge returned with a written order. He looked directly at Victoria before speaking. The court finds substantial evidence of fraudulent governance, selective enforcement, document alteration, and potential financial misconduct. He paused. Effective immediately. The $250,000 assessment against Mr. David Carter is declared null and void. Applause exploded through the courtroom. The judge allowed it for exactly 3 seconds before striking the gavel again. This court further orders all relevant evidence transferred to the county prosecutor for criminal review. Victoria slowly sat down. She didn't look at anyone. She simply stared at the defense table. The same woman who had spent months trying to intimidate me couldn't even lift her head. As everyone began filing out of the courtroom, Marcus touched my shoulder. It's over. I smiled. No. Looking across the room at Victoria, I quietly answered. I think it's finally beginning. Because while I just won my case, Victoria Langford still had to answer for everything else that security camera had uncovered. People always ask me what victory felt like. They imagine fireworks, celebrations, some dramatic movie ending where the bad people are led away in handcuffs while everyone applauds. The truth? It was much quieter than that. I walked outside the courthouse carrying the same worn leather folder I'd brought that morning. The sun was shining. Cars were driving by. People were laughing on the sidewalk. The world hadn't changed. But mine had. For the first time in almost a year. I could breathe. Marcus caught up with me on the courthouse steps. He held out his hand. I shook it. Then he surprised me. Go home. I laughed. That's your legal advice? No. He smiled. That's my human advice. You've spent months fighting. Go enjoy your house. I thanked him and drove home. As I turned into the neighborhood, I expected awkward stares. Instead, people waved. Not one or two. Almost everyone. Some of the same neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months suddenly smiled. A little boy riding his bicycle actually shouted, "Hi, Mr. Carter." When I pulled into my driveway, I nearly started crying. Someone had rebuilt the dog shelters. Not just rebuilt them. Made them better. Fresh cedar wood. New roofs. Clean bedding. 3 stainless steel bowls sat underneath. A handwritten note rested on top. It simply read, "Thank you for reminding us what kind of neighbors we're supposed to be." There wasn't a signature. There didn't need to be. By evening, half the neighborhood had stopped by. Frank brought over homemade chili. Emily showed up carrying dog food. The elderly widow who testified during the investigation arrived with 3 new dog beds. Even teenagers from down the street spent an hour painting the shelters. Watching everyone work together, I realized something. Victoria hadn't just been hurting me. She'd been teaching everyone to fear each other. Without that fear, the neighborhood felt completely different. A week later, the county prosecutor announced criminal charges. Not just against Victoria. Against Treasurer Bill Hansen. Against the management consultant. Against 2 contractors involved in the financial scheme. The investigation uncovered years of fraudulent billing. Landscaping projects that had never happened. Consulting invoices for work that didn't exist. Homeowners had been paying for improvements that were nothing more than numbers on paper. The local newspaper ran the story across the front page. The headline wasn't about me. It wasn't about the dogs. It simply read, "HOA board accused of widespread fraud." I preferred it that way. This had never really been about me. It was about everyone they'd pushed around before I came along. Over the next several months, more homeowners came forward. One family recovered thousands of dollars in wrongful fines. An elderly couple finally got approval to rebuild a wheelchair ramp the old board had refused. Another resident proved his property had been threatened over completely fabricated violations. One by one, the truth found daylight. The neighborhood elected an entirely new board. Emily agreed to serve again, but only after new rules were adopted. Every meeting would now be open to homeowners. Every vote would be recorded. Every financial report would be published online. No more secret executive sessions unless state law specifically allowed them. No more hidden decisions. No more intimidation. The changes passed unanimously. The very first motion approved by the new board made me smile. They officially removed every penalty ever issued against me. Not just the $250,000 assessment. Every single warning. Every notice. Every violation. As if they had never existed. Then came something I never expected. The board president, an older gentleman named Harold, knocked on my door one Saturday morning. He held out an envelope. "I think this belongs to you." Inside was a check. It represented reimbursement for every legal expense I'd personally paid during the lawsuit. I looked up. I didn't ask for this. I know. The community voted. They felt it was the right thing to do. I tried to refuse. Harold wouldn't let me. "You stood up when the rest of us stayed quiet." He smiled. "Please don't rob us of the chance to do one decent thing." A few months later, the shepherd finally trusted me enough to come inside the house. She walked cautiously through the front door, sniffed every room, then curled up beside Ellen's old reading chair. I sat there for a long time, watching her sleep. It somehow felt like life had come full circle. I decided to give her a name after all. Grace. Because that's exactly what she'd brought back into my life. The old black lab was adopted by Frank. The little brown mutt became the neighborhood's unofficial mascot. Children called her Lucky. The name stuck. Every afternoon she'd wander from yard to yard collecting treats from people who once pretended she didn't exist. Sometimes I'd sit on my porch in the evening and watch families walking together. Kids riding scooters. Neighbors talking. Dogs playing in the grass. The neighborhood finally looked the way a community should. Not perfect. Just kind. About a year after everything ended, Marcus stopped by for coffee. We sat on the porch while Grace rested at our feet. He looked across the street toward Victoria's old house. It had been sold months earlier. A young family had moved in. Flower boxes hung beneath the windows. Children's chalk drawings covered the driveway. Marcus smiled. "Funny how quickly things change." I nodded. "They do." He took a sip of coffee. "Do you ever regret fighting?" I thought about that for a long moment. Honestly, there were days during that lawsuit when I wanted to quit. Days I wondered if feeding 3 stray dogs had been worth everything it cost me. Then Grace walked over and rested her head on my knee. I scratched behind her ears just like I had the first morning we'd met. I looked at Marcus. "No, I don't regret standing up. I regret waiting so long. Because here's something I've learned. Bullies almost never stop on their own. They stop when ordinary people finally decide they're done being afraid. If I'd paid that first fine, none of this would have come to light. The fraud would have continued. Families would have kept losing money. More homeowners would have been threatened. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel brave. Sometimes it feels exhausting, lonely, even hopeless. But eventually, the truth catches up. And when it does, it doesn't need to shout. It simply stands there, patient, impossible to ignore. So every morning I still carry 3 bowls onto my porch. Grace waits beside me. Lucky usually appears from somewhere down the street. Frank's old lab limps over a few minutes later. The routine hasn't changed much. Only now, when neighbors walk by, they don't see a violation. They see 3 dogs getting breakfast, and an old man keeping a promise he made to his late wife years ago. Treat the ones who can't repay you with kindness. Because you never know. The smallest act of compassion might expose the biggest lie anyone's ever tried to hide. If you've ever had someone try to weaponize against you, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it ended. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.